Good evening, all. I, Chaitanya Bansal, on behalf of Team Corporate Law Advisor, welcome you all to the webinar on counterattacking bribery and corruption risk in the new normal, organized in collaboration with EY Forensic and Integrity Services. Corporate Law Advisor is a more than 3 decade old publishing house in the field of corporate laws. CLA Online is a premier e-library in India on corporate, SEBI, and insolvency laws since 1950. The e-library consists of case laws, wealth, wealth of intellectual knowledge in the shape of articles by experts, procedure under company law resolutions, queries and reply by their experts, updated notifications of departments, and much more. EY Forensic and Integrity Services is a part of EY, which helps in conducting fraud risk assessments, institute proactive anti-corruption programs, and to achieve integrity agenda. The team assists the companies to embed integrity in their strategic vision and day-to-day operations in their working and solves complex issues of fraud, regulatory compliance, investigations, and business disputes. In India, it's the largest forensic practice providing such services to large organizations in India and abroad. The aim of this webinar is to provide insights on bribery, corruption, fraud risks, and compliances in India and across the globe. The EY speakers will draw inference from their book, Checkmate Corruption, that highlights a constant battle between corruption and anti-corruption like a game of chess. The session shall be conducted by Mr. Arpinder Singh, Mr. Vinay Garodiya, Mr. Patrick Moulette, and Ms. Pooja Roy. Arpinder sir is a partner and head of India and emerging markets with EY Forensic and Integrity Services. He has over 25 years of experience in global investigations, dispute advisory, and corporate governance matters. He is one of the few experts in India who was previously an internal auditor, statutory auditor, financial controller, and now leads forensic investigations. He has been consistently been featured in Who's Who legal rankings in arbitration and forensic accountants guides. He is a special invitee in the ICAI's Digital Accounting and Assurance Board for the period 2020 to 21. Vinay sir is a partner with EY Forensic and Integrity Services. He is a qualified CA and a certified fraud examiner from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, having an experience of over 16 years. He has led large investigations around corporate fraud, misconduct, bribery, and corruption. His areas of expertise include investigations, forensic audits, risk management, and conducting compliance training. He is the co-author of the book Checkmate Corruption. Patrick sir is the head of Anti-Corruption Division in the OECD Directorate of Financial and Enterprise Affairs. He leads the work of 44-country working group on bribery in international business transactions. He previously served for 10 years as executive secretary of the FATF. He also worked for the Department of French Ministry of Finance. He regularly speaks in public events related to international corruption and financial crimes. Pooja ma'am is the director with the Forensic and Integrity Services team in EY India. She is a chartered accountant and a certified fraud examiner. She is a certified lead auditor and implementer of ISO 37001 anti-bribery management systems and has an experience of over 10 years in the field of fraud investigations, compliance, internal audit, and risk advisory. Before we begin the session, I would like to request all participants to please be on mute. During this session, if any participant has any query, feel free to post it in the chat box and they will be duly considered. With these words, I now hand over the dais to Patrick, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your introduction, and also thank you for inviting me to this event. I'm very impressed with the number of participants. I think it's very good that Ernst & Young India has taken this initiative of organizing the event so that the issue of corruption, bribery, or rather anti-corruption, anti-bribery are discussed. So my pleasure, really an honor to be with you today. So I've been asked by the organizers to provide a global overview on corruption, which I think is a very, very broad topic. It could take a lot of time. So I've decided to choose maybe a more slightly narrow approach and talk mostly about international bribery, transnational bribery, foreign bribery, as we say, because this is the specialty of the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Although the pictures here says a lot, I would like to bring you now to the details of the international landscape for combating transnational bribery. Of course, I'm here and I've been invited because the OECD has developed this convention back in 1997, Convention for Combating Bribery of Foreign Public Officials in International Business Transactions, which is a legally binding instrument. It's very rare that the OECD has this kind of instrument in place, but I think it shows the importance of this issue of transnational bribery. It's a very specialized treaty, but I think it has a lot of strength, and it's also a convention which has an impact on business and business work, because it's about combating bribery in international business transactions. But it's not the only convention, as you see. I mean, the world is full of treaties and conventions against corruption. So this is where we are. And of course, the United Nations Convention also is very important. Can we go to the next slide, please? Coming back to the convention of the OECD, which purpose is to target the bribery of foreign public officials in international business transactions. So it seems a very narrow scope, but in fact it covers big corruption cases. And interestingly enough, the convention is not limited to the 37 OECD members. It's an open treaty for non-member economies, and especially important economies from the G20. And you can see that several countries of the G20 has signed and ratified the convention, like Argentina, Brazil, Russia, South Africa. Recently, we've got a new country as participant, which means observer. It is Saudi Arabia. But still, several G20 countries are missing, China, India, Indonesia. So, and it's an objective, of course, for us to one day to have India in the group, because given the size and the importance of the Indian economy, it would make a lot of sense so for India to be with its peers in the convention. And certainly your country don't want to be the last in the race to join. So can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, a little bit about what have we achieved. and I'm not going to comment each and every data or number here on this slide, but a major benefit of the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention is the results coming from reviews, reports, monitoring reports. It's a very robust mechanism. Each country is evaluated in turn by 2 other countries of the working group to look at the implementation of the convention and enforcement also of the foreign bribery laws. So there's been a lot of reports, more than 200, a lot of recommendations for changes in country, more than 1,500. And as a result, bribery is now illegal in the 44 countries. Also, corporate liabilities. This is probably of interest to the participants in the event today, have been established, created, or strengthened. And also in terms of the progress on legislation, it's really interesting to note that now no country allows the tax deductibility, of bribe payments. This was not the case when the convention was signed more than 20 years ago. Still amazing to think that at that time it was possible, before 1997, it was possible just to deduct from your tax return the bribe payments. Now it's forbidden. Yeah, and maybe where we are not so good is the fact that not all the countries who have signed the convention have concluded a case up to sanction. It's, as you see here, 21 countries have yet to conclude the foreign bribery enforcement action. So this is a matter of concern, obviously. But I'm providing, I think, a honest picture of the situation from the bribery, anti-bribery point of view. Can we move to the next one, please? Now, another topic which I wanted to discuss with you this morning, after having let's say, addressed in a rather general way, but where do we stand at the international level in the fight against bribery and corruption? That was the first part of my presentation. Now, an issue which is very topical and it's worth spending a moment on it is the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on corruption. So, it's true that, or rather, I could say it differently, that the COVID-19 crisis has brought a lot of challenges in terms of, health, of course, human suffering, economic disruption, psychological issues, and disease. And everything is on a global scale. So in this context, it's obvious that the new environment is ripe for corruption and bribery. Because we are not, the economies are not functioning as they usually do. Certainly, there's some pressure to have the delivery of medical products, pharmaceutical products, vaccines, for example. We know that already in normal times, the health sector is a prominent sector for bribery. Several years ago, we carried out a study to identify the economic sectors who are prone to bribery and corruption. And this is on the basis of cases concluded in justice. And we found that 8% of the cases, there were about 500 cases, 8% of those cases involve the health sector. So it's quite prone to corruption and bribery. And of course, it is exacerbated in the current crisis because there's a lot of demand. And law enforcement probably have other priorities. This is at least what we see. in many countries. They probably focus more on domestic order, security, domestic security, maybe more controls at the border. So in fact, they have the risk to have an increased level of corruption and bribery. And as you can imagine, also just to continue to elaborate on the law enforcement, and they don't work the same. In some countries last year, some trials were suspended. Now it starts again. Some trials are carried out virtually or even in a hybrid mode. So law enforcement and the judicial system, they adapt, or they need to adapt to the new working conditions. But really, one must think about how to carry out an investigation when you can't really talk face to face to the witness or to the defendants. It's very challenging overall. So I mean, there are two aspects here. The first is that the conditions, the context, economic conditions lead to potential opportunities or more opportunities for corruption and bribery. And on the other hand, the state response should continue to be strong in terms of the commitment to fight bribery, because there's a risk that it's not a priority, which I think would be a mistake, because it's more than ever a priority to fight against corruption and bribery. Can we go to the next one, please? So, now this is a list of policy measures that the OECD has developed to avoid corruption and bribery in the context of the COVID-19 crisis. So basically, there are three messages. The first one is a message to governments. They, more than ever, they need to respect the rule of laws and also to stick to their commitments. The fight against corruption is not decided in countries in isolation. It comes from international treaties, which I've mentioned already, and then how the countries are implementing. So respecting the rule of law, maintaining firm commitment towards implementation of international anti-corruption standards and anti-bribery obligations. This is very important, and I would say even imperative. So this is why the OECD last year, at the beginning of the crisis, published a public statement was issued in April to remind the world that state parties to the convention would continue to implement it in a very strict manner. So this is the starting point. But now the response to the COVID-19 crisis, as far as corruption and bribery are concerned, is of course not only for governments. There's a lot to do for the business community. And here again, I would say more than ever, internal controls, compliance programs for anti-corruption, they are very necessary. They are even more necessary than before. So the message from our side is to continue, of course, to apply and even to enhance compliance programs. And one of the particular issues is, of course, the role of intermediaries, which is prevalent really in international bribery. So intermediaries should be really a matter of special attention for business. And finally, to conclude or to go, let's say, to the third aspect of the policy measures to combat corruption and bribery in the COVID-19 context, whistleblowers are even more critical than they were before, because as we all know, the biggest problem for corruption and enforcement against corruption is detection of cases. Cases will not come naturally in the hands of the law enforcement or the police. So they really need to be a mechanism to detect allegations at least, and then the allegations need to be further investigated, obviously. It's not because you report a whistleblower that you report an allegation, you don't necessarily report a fact, a proven fact of corruption. But this dimension is very important under the current time. So these are the three messages. And now it was good to go to the next slide. Yeah. If you are interested to know more about the work of the OECD in combating bribery and corruption, there are quite a few publications here. Maybe of interest, a recent study on the detection of foreign bribery, which I've just mentioned. Also, we published 2 years ago a study on non-trial resolutions, which is the new way for justice to conclude cases. So it's quite interesting to see how the judicial system is adapting, not necessarily using the traditional court system, but rather based on the American model, a speedy way to deal with the cases. Of course, this triggers a lot of discussion and debate. So you can see this in this report. And maybe of interest to the participants, because I guess you are more private sector representatives, a study which is really in the middle, down, about corporate anti-corruption compliance, drivers, mechanisms, and ideas for change. It's a very recent study from last year, and it analyzes why companies, not countries, are choosing to equip themselves with anti-corruption compliance programs. And it's a report which is based on an actual survey of several hundreds of companies. So really worth reading, and you may get some inspiration for your work in this publication. But my overall message is really, again, for India, and of course, it's not the business sector, it's not the auditors who decide on the country's participation in international agreement. But one of my messages today, in terms of the conclusion, is really to encourage, whatever means are, to encourage your government. You can have a push also. You can suggest that they really take steps to, first of all, have a foreign bribery law in India, which I think is not the case so far. So one of the few countries in the G20 not having this kind of law. And then the next step, engaging further with the OECD and the 44 countries who have already signed the convention. I think I don't have a clock on my screen, but I think I'm using most of the time I've been given. I know that we will have, after me, a passionate session with Arpinder Singh and Vinay Garodiya and their book, which I have not read the book, but I think the theme is interesting, comparing the fight against corruption and the Checkmate is quite interesting. So there's a lot of probably food for thoughts here in the upcoming session. And once again, I would like to thank everybody for their participation, attention. It's a very important topic, fighting corruption, fighting bribery for all the countries in the world, for India, but all the other countries. And the OECD is always ready to work with countries, even the countries who are not part of the organization, so that we can all collectively engage and improve the fight against bribery and corruption. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Patrick. I think that was a great update and good insights. And I think I really like the fact that there's so many documentation and publications which come out to guide all of us as we deal with the fight against bribery and corruption on a daily basis, especially in emerging markets where there are so many risks and pitfalls every day. So we'll share a little bit about our book and a little bit about the landscape as we see it in India, which is evolving. So maybe we can go to the next slide. So I'm joined today by two of my colleagues, Vinay Garodiya, who's a partner colleague of mine, and Pooja, who's a director. And I think we're going to, between us, cover excerpts of the books, as well as a little bit about the background of what we see as changing in the global market as well as in India. And obviously, India is closely connected now with the rest of the world, primarily because of the fact that either a lot of companies in India are listing in the US, especially with all the SPACs, which we hear of, the latest new investment vehicle. And then also you have a lot of listing in the UK. You have a lot of people who take funding or work on multilateral projects similar to World Bank, ADB, OECD, UN. So we have to comply with the global bribery and corruption regulations. So I think India is no longer an isolated country. I think it's changed. I think more and more as there's private equity investments, joint ventures, multinationals working in India, Indian companies working outside India, I think that paradigm has changed. It's no longer a voluntary requirement. I think everybody has to comply with global regulations. And we see that. Just to give an idea, I used to never do so much FCPA or bribery and corruption due diligence when private equity was investing into companies in India. But in the last 1 year, it's become pretty much mandatory now. Everyone does it. So if the company doesn't pass a bribery and corruption diligence, you will very rarely get funding from a global organization. So coming back to this key global bribery and corruption developments, I think Department of Justice, and if you look at the FCPA trends, a lot of people have said it was COVID. A lot of people say there was political changes happening in the US. But reality is, if you look at it, 2020 actually was the largest FCPA enforcement year, which gives an indication. Obviously, these are all indicators, but it was the largest year of FCPA collections. That means the money actually penalized and how much money was collected as penalties on the large FCP enforcements. Obviously, there's a little bit of skepticism that these were non-US companies which were penalized by the US. But obviously, I'm sure Patrick will add more to that. But the reality is it is still good sign that there's enforcement happening, because enforcement is a good deterrent. Also, the fact is there was a departure. Now you have a lot of companies across the region like China, Latin America, companies from there which are being penalized for their operations. You have sectors across the board like oil and gas, healthcare, financial services, aerospace. So it's not just focused on one sector. It is not focused on one region. It seems to be well spread. And I think that just shows that no matter which sector you are in, no matter which country you're in, you have to comply. Technology, I think the future of compliance has changed. Now, especially with COVID, I think it taught us all that you can still do virtual audits, you can still do virtual investigations, you can still do virtual inquiries. You don't have to physically be on site. I think with geotagging, satellites, questionnaires, great access through companies like Zoom or Teams and other such things. I think it's just amazing how you can virtually pretty much act as if you're working well together. So I think there's been a huge shift in anti-corruption measures from the traditional to the digital landscape, and you will see more and more. I think we've been forced to adapt it in a faster and quicker way. And as the World Bank chief said, digital technologies offer hope in a fight against corruption. Can we go to the next slide, please? If you look at the fact that there is guidance also being given out. So if you look at some of the guidance which has been given out by the SEC and DOJ, it talks about the continuous evolution of risk assessment programs. If some of you haven't read it, please reach out to us. We're happy to share it with you, or you can get it online also. But the important part is they're saying the risk assessment process has to be constantly reassessed. What does that mean? Let's take the COVID issue, which has also been raised by Patrick. Reality is risks are changing. Now you have cyber risk, you have risks in doing work from home or working in a virtual environment. You can't sign agreements now in pen and paper. You have to do it digitally. There's so many new risks coming in. You have to manage your risk assessment register based on that. Also, the fact is you have to consider third-party risks, which continue to be an issue. Also, access to data by compliance teams, any risk of bias. So the fact is, I give this common example of artificial intelligence. The fact is, what is artificial intelligence? You're learning from the past and you're predicting the future. And the fact is that there could be inherent bias in it, right? Let's take giving loans. Was there a bias towards actually giving bad loans, which you're going to learn from? So I think it's very important to learn from these and make sure that whenever you use technology, you keep your eyes and ears open, because technology is great. We have no options, but we got to be careful as we adopt them. And why does fighting corruption matter? The fact is, during COVID, your risks are increasing. As I said, your interaction with third parties are virtual. You're increasing your interaction with government. There's going to be absence of on-site presence. You no longer do audits of warehouses as frequently as you used to. You don't see so many manual records anymore. You may miss something. So it's important to be very skeptical in today's day and age as you deal with compliance in this virtual world of living through COVID. Can we go to the next slide, please? If you look at the survey which was done, it's called the EVA Integrity Report, the fact is that 90% of the businesses surveyed said that the height of pandemic believed that COVID-19 posed a significant risk to ethical conduct. And if you look at all the ACFE, State of the Unions, or any other survey, they said when the last big serious inflection point happened in 2007-8, when the large economic stress happened, there was huge amount of fraud which happened post that. I think this is also a time of huge amount of pressure and economic distress. And I think that will lead to a lot of pressure. And we all as compliance professionals need to hold very strong in light of this pressure which we will face, due to the economic pressures and stresses we face on a daily basis. 63% of the respondents said it's very difficult for organizations to maintain standards of integrity in a difficult market condition. That's a fact. Honestly, you have to keep your employees motivated. You have to get your factories back running. You have to get your supply chains operational. You have to get imports in working. There's huge government touch points. And in this bad time, you may tend to compromise some of these, because in the light of saying business is more important and compliance is less important, sometimes you lose that objectivity in a distressful situation. 32% of the people surveyed said bribery and corruption continues to be one of the top risks. So continues to be an issue. It is continues to be a battle which we are facing. The last indicator was a big, interesting surprise for me, where 29% of the people today, also after all the effort which has happened in compliance in the last few years, say that employees have not reported concerns about integrity because they are worried about their personal safety. Now that's a big concern, right? So we as organizations have to make sure our people are comfortable around reporting complaints, and they need to report complaints, as that's a very important and critical aspect. If you look at some of the key issues, non-compliances or favoring the known, which means basically, people are worried about job cuts and they say, hey, I don't care about compliance, I'm just trying to save my job. Now that's a pressure point, right? And you have to resist that. Or the fact that your interactions with government officials, because you had a central team, which was corporate affairs, which was dealing with government interactions, which were trained properly on how to deal with the bribery and corruption risk, are now having to get decentralized, because you can't travel. So you have to have local people who are not fully trained having to deal with government officials. The risk automatically doubles. There's disruption with COVID. We all know that. There's going to be huge amount of disputes with suppliers. Supply chains are fully disrupted. Work from home is happening. I think that significantly increases the corruption risks. If you go to the next slide, please. Now we come to the book. The book, and I'll just give a high level view and then I'll pass over to my colleague Vinay. But basically, we've tried to break it into pawns, knights, rooks, and kings and queens. Anybody who's played chess, and we wanted to see how the whole landscape worked as a chessboard, and we tried to put the whole corruption landscape as that. So you have people at the junior level, mid level, and senior officials, and then you have the corruption landscape correlation to it. But I won't steal my colleague's thunder. So Vinay, over to you to go through it in detail.
Thanks, Arpinder. Thanks, Patrick. I think the board is well set to play the game here now, and all of us now do understand the importance of the entire topic around anti-corruption or anti-bribery, and how important for us it is in our individual capacities and in our corporate responsibilities to be complying with the local laws and by the global laws. Now, when you look at, when we were writing the book, Arpinder and myself, we met a lot of industry representatives, and we did more than 40 interviews with different levels with the organization and on the judiciary side. And we realized, there is a constant friction, there is a constant war between the two sides. One are the people who are of the corrupt mindset, who want to do business in a corrupt fashion, and the other side is are the people and the judiciary and the laws and regulations who continuously thrive to force compliance and anti-corruption culture. And on both the sides, there are people divided into 2, 3 different levels and different responsibilities and different level of roles which they play, and which is where the game of chess came to our mind. Now, if you really see how we have spread it, there are two sides: corruption side and the anti-corruption side. And similar to chess, where there are pawns, then there is mid-level, which is knights and rooks and bishops, and then there is a king and the queen. Now, there is different level of importance played by the three, and there is a different role, different movements, different authorities given to each of them in the game of chess. Similarly, in the game of corruption, if you look at the corruption landscape side, there are some of these junior representatives who are, the frontline workers, the peons, or the low-level staff who do the running around, who will actually do the licensing, who will go and meet the government officials, or who will interact and transact on behalf of the company more often than not. But do they really have a decision-making power? No. What do? They generally follow the instructions. They follow whatever is being told to them. Their level of knowledge around being compliant, what is the law, what are the regulations, what would be the implication, is very basic and primary. They are not well trained and well educated on the law topics or the compliance topics. So but they are the movers in the market. But that's the limited role which they play. Then comes the mid-level, which is the knights and the rooks and the bishops, which are the middle level representatives, and they hold decision-making roles. Now, these are the people who will actually instruct the pawns to do what they want them to do, and they very well understand the pitfalls of non-compliance. But often they are moved or driven by greed and growth aspirations, because they have to show results to the king and the queen for them to get promoted, for them to move fast, for them to achieve their business targets, etc. Right? Then coming to the next and the last level, which are the most senior people in the organizations or in the corruption side, which are the kings and the queens. Now, these are some of the senior officials, and these are the masterminds of the games. I mean, they are the ones who set the tone, either right or wrong, by their own actions, by their own words, by having a right policy and framework in the company, or not having the same, or setting wrong examples for the employees, or setting wrong messages. We must have theoretically or practically heard the sentence, "Do it, I'm not concerned how you do it. I am only worried about the results. I only need results." These are the typical one-liners which sometimes you hear from the top management, and which may lead to a wrong message passing on to the ground, saying that the top boss only wants results. He doesn't care how I get those results. So let me find out the easiest way, or let me find out a quicker way, so that I don't waste time. Now, that is on the corruption side. If you come to the non-corruption or anti-corruption landscape, again, there are 3 different levels. The basic and again, the junior most level are the pawns. These are the people who are driven by an integrity standard. They are driven by a mindset which believes that you have to do work ethically. When they are asked to do something unethically, they feel uncomfortable in that organization. They feel they are cheated. They feel they are not doing the right thing. And these are the people who eventually become whistleblowers. Some of them who could not or do not have adequate courage will change organizations frequently until they get into a role where they are not asked to do something unethical, or where they don't see other people doing unethical activities. But till that time, either they keep changing the organizations, or they would actually want to blow the whistle and make complaints, either internally or directly to the regulators. The next levels are the knights and the rooks, who are the judicial system and the enforcement agencies here. Now, if you only talk about India, there are multiple investigation agencies and a complete set of judicial system. Like if you take the MCA side, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, that's a complete chain where Ministry of Corporate Affairs, Serious Fraud Investigation, and the team takes charge of doing investigations. If we go from the RBI route, they are a regulator and an enforcement agency for all the financial organizations or the financial companies like banks and other financial systems. Central Bureau of Investigation is again a centralized investigation agency directly controlled by the central government and gets cases on investigation for including anti-corruption. And similarly, there are others like Enforcement Directorate, Central Vigilance Commission, etc., etc. So there are various ways, and there is a proper judicial system and enforcement agencies in India to execute or investigate. They become the mid-level. Now they are driven by what? They are driven by the king and the queen, which is the law and the regulation of the country, which is the apex authority. Now nobody can go beyond the law of the nation, and the law keeps changing. The law keeps updating, either basis recent cases or basis changes or amendments. We will see a few amendments and few new laws which India is using to run the battle or win the battle of anti-corruption. But this is the landscape which you should keep in mind when you get into a corruption discussion, or when you're facing practical corruption related issues in your organization or in your personal lives. We will look at some of the examples now of the cases that have happened in India. We have masked this so that we don't open the names or make some names which are though public, but we don't want to show any names here. So, but if you see on the right hand side, which is the anti-corruption side, as I spoke, the whistleblower complaints on rise in India INC. Now, these are the pawns on the anti-corruption side. These are the people who are not comfortable doing something in an unethical manner, and they come and blow up the whistle. And I mean, most recently in recent years, there is enough opportunities and platforms where people can blow the whistle. I mean, we see a lot of WhatsApp messages floating around. We see whistleblowing directly on social media platforms, directly to the regulators. There are hotlines which has been which is set by the government or by the Anti-Corruption Bureau, where people can go and put a complaint or a whistleblowing. I can see some comments stating they are unable to see the screen. The screen is visible to me. Anybody else facing the problem? Pooja, can you see the screen yourself?
We can see the screen.
Okay. Similarly, on the corruption side, if you see, there is consumer sales head who is detained in the corruption probe. If you look at the fifth point on the left-hand side. Now, this is a mid-level, a rook or a bishop type of an entity. Whereas if you see the last one, where a CEO or an executive director is booked for a role in a 3,000 crore default case. This is the senior management, the kings and the queen. So any practical case you pick up, there are different levels of involvement of these different players, either on the corruption side or on the anti-corruption side. Now, the idea is to manage all these three levels on the anti-corruption side to drive a culture of anti-corruption or compliance in an organization. We will see a little more on how we do that and what are the expectations from the government side, and how would a corporate or a company or an individual respond to those expectations of the law. Moving ahead, let's see some of the changes that we have recently seen by the Indian regulators, and which is the king and the queen side of the anti-corruption, where there are changes or amendments or improvements in the legal framework which has happened with an expectation to curb corruption or curb illegal activities or wrongful activities. The most important one is the amendment to the Prevention of Corruption Act, which happened in 2018. It took a while for India to bring an amendment to this law, because erstwhile this law was only applicable to the bribe acceptors, right, which are more often than not the government officers. But technically, who is corrupting them? The people who are ready to pay the money are the ones who are corrupting these people who are ready to accept the money. If there is no payer side, there will be no receiver side. And if you look at some of the global regulations like FCPA or the UK Bribery Act or the French law, most of them actually deal with the pay side of corruption. They will prosecute the company or an individual who has been involved in paying a bribe. Because if you cut that side of it, the receiver side automatically is taken care of. Right? And which is where in 2018 this amendment came in. However, we have not seen a lot of enforcement yet around this topic. There may be various technical reasons. One of the technical reasons most openly spoken about in public forums is that there is an express permission required from the government before you start prosecuting a public official. But there may be some other reasons. Maybe the entire 2020 was a washout year because of COVID. Maybe because of that, there is a drop in the corruption cases or less of enforcement. But I think only the time will tell us how this new law plays an important role in bringing some level of compliance fear or compliance culture in Indian people and Indian organizations. The Central Vigilance Commission plays a very important role in driving a compliance or anti-corruption culture in the public sector organizations, and in its various different circulars and publishments which CVC comes up with, they have suggested PSUs in signing of integrity pacts or in getting into a ISO 37001 implementation. And ISO 37001 is an anti-bribery management system, which is a certifiable standard now. So you can set up a program, get an auditor to audit it, and give you a certificate of having a robust anti-bribery and corruption compliance framework. CVC suggests public sector organizations to get this certification done now, and few public sectors have actually gone up in taking such certifications. So there is some level of cultural shift attempt that is happening from the CVC side. There is a new Fugitive Economic Offenders Act which came in 2018 after we saw a series of people who defrauded banks and other regulatory agencies in India and left the border. They went and settled into other countries, and now it is becoming difficult to get them back and prosecute them in India. So which is where this act came in to again create a level of fear that if you run away, you can first be detained, and second, your properties can be confiscated under as an economic offender, right? And there we already see some movements on this, some actions and some enforcements on this side. Similarly, there is a constant activity or a constant effort from the government side to create a culture of whistleblowing, to give certain protection to whistleblowing, maintain and respect the confidentiality of the identity of the whistleblower. And there are also attempts to create a provision for rewarding the whistleblowers in some manner or not. So there is a continuous effort in which whistleblowing regulations are also being drafted and amended by the government side. So this is on the anti-corruption side where some movements have happened. This is again details of the Prevention of Corruption Act. I think in interest of time, I won't go into too much of detail, but the key amendments now is, as a payer of bribe, you are equally an offender under this act, like a receiver of bribe. Even if you're paying it in your individual capacity, if you're paying it for your company's behalf, or any other purpose through a third party or anything else. But if there is a bribe which is proved, you are also an equal offender under the law. Commercial organizations have also been brought under the law. So if it is proved that the bribe was paid by XYZ on behalf of a commercial organization and on instructions of a director or a manager or a secretarial officer of the organization, all of them, including the commercial organization, is brought under the gamut of the law, and they will be prosecuted. Now there are fines and there are penalties, or there are imprisonment provisions also in the law for individuals and for companies. The only defense that the company may have at that point in time where somebody is being caught bribing on behalf of the company is for company to demonstrate to the regulatory agencies that the company has implemented all adequate procedures to prevent corruption, or to prevent its people and its vendors and its third parties to pay any type of bribe on their behalf, or go or do any type of an illegal activity on their behalf. That kind of a framework the company will have to demonstrate, and only then the company can be set free. Now, how the organizations are reacting to this is something which is there on the slide now, but there is a detailed slide later on which my colleague Pooja will take you, will cover it there. Somebody muted me. I'm sorry about that.
I had a quick question in the previous slide. Can you able to take up it?
Yes, Manohar. Can you post your questions in the chat box, Manohar? I think, sorry about that.
Sure,
but
no problem.
Rest of time, just put it on the chat box and we will try and revert
Sure,
towards
no
the
issues.
end of it. Yeah. Thanks, Manohar. This is the corruption perception index, which is published every year. And if you see for the last 5 years, India has been consistently in the same range. The ranks are between 79, 76 or 86. And the scores are constantly at 40, 41, 40. Now, if you look at specific reasons of why India is not improving in its rank, or why the scores are also almost the same in spite of putting in so much of effort or so much of regulation, so much of enforcement, etc. The problem is this is a long journey, and like Patrick said, you can't move from a corrupt environment or a culture to an anti-corruption mindset overnight. So it's a long journey. I think the efforts have started being put in. The world will soon realize that India is moving into a right direction. I hope so, fingers crossed. But for now, you can just conclude that the perception of India globally is pretty average. Generally, the ranks are amongst 170, 180 countries, roughly. It changes every year. So we are kind of in middle. Now, what is the challenge? When we talk about we saw that the government is doing something on the anti-corruption side by changing laws, by making enforcement agencies stronger and giving them more autonomy to act and to do the investigations. But what are the challenges on the corruption side, or the corporate side, or the individual side? People like us who are common people, what do we face? So when we were writing this book, we did, as I said, we did 40 plus interviews, which included some of the very, very senior people on the company's side, and even some mid-level executives. And what we heard from them is things like India is culturally different from US mindset and approach. So this is the thought which we are running with. And there are some other practical challenges which my colleague Pooja will take you through now. Pooja, over to you.
Thanks, Vinay. So like when I mentioned, as part of the research for putting together our book, we spoke to over 40 interviewees. We kept a combination of compliance professionals and also business folks across different functions, like maybe procurement, finance, to really understand what are the challenges that they faced on the ground as well. Some of the key themes which actually came out were, number one, that historically, India has had a problem of having too many compliances. Earlier, most of it was through the manual route. In the last few years, we have seen a lot of the compliances moving towards the online mode, and some of the even government sector procurement has also now moved to the e-tendering mode, which eliminates definitely some element of interaction and discretion that government officials may have had, but still there is some progress to be made. Apart from that, another cultural aspect is that in India, somewhere the mentality has always been that some bit of bribery and corruption is acceptable because of the way things function here, and there hasn't really been a lack of any stigma associated with people entering into or involving themselves in such practices. In terms of on-ground challenges, I think a key point which came across was the role of third parties. So, for instance, third parties play an extremely critical role for any organization. They're enablers in terms of we may procure materials and services for them. Importantly, we may use their their help for government licenses and approvals. A lot of organizations in industries use them as distributors or sales agents. So there is a lot of business dependencies on third parties, and they are a critical part of the business model of many companies. But I think what is important is to also realize that they also bring in another layer of bribery and corruption risks for the organization, and it is important for organizations to monitor them effectively so that they are not held liable for any acts of their third parties. So these are the some of the themes that we heard in terms of challenges that companies faced on the ground. In terms of just looking at this in the context of chess, the way the chessboard has been set up by Arpinder and Vinay, and what are really the roles of each of the players, how do you really draw checkmate against corruption? I think if you look at it, understanding the lay of the land is the most critical aspect. What that means in anti-bribery and anti-corruption terms is really to understand what are the risks facing the organization. In terms of the industry that they are in, some industries are exposed to higher level of risk because of being highly regulated, such as oil and gas, metals and mining. Some may not be as much. The risk associated may also be different. For a consumer products company, it may be the risk that they have are around licenses to establish any premises or continuing operations. For others, it may be otherwise. So understanding what are the risks that an organization faces from a bribery and corruption perspective, considering its business model, locations of operations, etc., is an important element, and to essentially do a risk assessment of bribery and corruption risks. Once we understand that what risks the organization is exposed to internally and externally, it is important to define the rules of the game. The rules of the game essentially means what kinds of policies and processes are there pertaining to bribery and corruption, to deter bribery and corruption. So these would be around aspects such as gifting, hospitality. How do you really monitor third parties, when you engage with them, and then monitor them through their life cycle. One important element in defining the rules of the game is that the guidance provided should also take into account practical challenges faced on the ground by team members. So it's a good idea to just include maybe some red flags either in the policies or in trainings, so that employees across the organization can relate to it, and it takes into consideration scenarios that they may face on the ground. Moving ahead to the third point, which is lead your brood of players. This essentially means that you have to set the right tone at the top when it comes to zero tolerance to bribery and corruption. In many companies, junior and mid-level staff really look up to senior management, and they try to emulate the actions that they will see. So it's important to set the right tone so that employees across the organization see that whatever is being passed on in the form of guidance is also being implemented or practiced by senior management. So like when I was mentioning that if the message in the policies is that we say a no to bribery and corruption, but then in meetings or in in-person interactions the messaging given is that do what you need to do to get business done, that may not set the right expectation for or right examples for employees. The fourth part is again getting to know the gray side, friend or foe. Again, this refers to third parties and how, while it is important to engage with them, they have to be done considering certain keeping in mind the risk that they may be exposing us to. The fifth point is around teaching the players the right moves. So, which is essentially training employees on bribery and corruption related matters. What we typically see is that there are organizations who've invested in training their employees around these matters and some of the challenges that they may face. But one step which really helps make this relevant for them is to have focused trainings for different groups. So, for example, a finance team may need guidance on how do you really detect such payments or when they receive bills for processing, while while the department which liaisons with the government officials may need guidance on how do you really handle such requests when they come in, and how do you say no to them because your organization doesn't permit you for such things. So having focused trainings really helps make this more relevant and real for employees. And once we've have in place these elements, what is important is to also readjust yourself depending on what's working well and what's not. So once a bribery and corruption framework has been set up, after some time it is important to periodically evaluate it to understand that which are the what's working well, what's not working well. Often once a framework has been set up, businesses or functions come back with inputs in terms of what is really enabling them and what is becoming more of a hindrance. So it has to be a balance between business and compliance needs, so as not to cause a compliance fatigue type of scenario setting in. So these are some of the ways that how do you really draw a checkmate against corruption. Some points that I think we'd like to cover is that how do companies readjust themselves and their risk mitigating measures. If you take a scenario like COVID, which is really an exceptional one, in this also we've seen how organizations are readapting themselves. Senior managements are continuing to enforce that integrity is one of the key aspects. Though a lot of industries across globe are working remotely, I think it is important to pass a message that even in a remote environment, if there are any concerns that people have, the organization is listening, and any concerns raised will be addressed in a suitable manner. Some of the issues which may have come up at the time of COVID, like maybe some processes have been bypassed, people have misused the exceptional approval route because they probably knew nobody was keeping vigilance at that time. If any such malpractices have occurred, senior management across organizations should really give confidence to their employees that even in a remote environment, they can raise any concerns that they have. Again, on the technology bit, I think Arpinder had covered it, so I will not go much into that. On ISO 37001 certification, so Vinay briefly touched upon this, but this isn't certifiable, auditable standard for anti-bribery management systems. It has worked well for companies who are, who work on projects which are funded by large development banks like World Banks or UN projects, because in those kind of funded projects, what is critical is the integrity elements that they need to give confidence to such bodies on. Sorry. Can everybody go on mute? I think I'm getting some disturbance. Sorry about that. On ISO 37001, we've seen a lot of technology companies go for it as well, and some others, especially who faced certain issues in the past. So this essentially is a way for them to demonstrate that the organization is investing in ramping up their compliance and is committed to it. Another innovative way which a lot of companies are taking is launching social media campaigns. Some have even invested in gaming apps and other mobile apps to really just send out reminders or have a quiz sort of thing. And these are just really interesting ways to make compliance more interesting and in a way which is engaging for employees. The last part again comes back to third parties, is again that in light of COVID, we may have engaged with a lot, organizations may have engaged with a lot of third parties, which may have been new due to shortage of time. They may not have gone through the right checks and balances before being engaged with us. So it is important to really reevaluate them in the context of integrity and really see that the parties that we're engaged with are the right ones and will not expose us to any additional bribery and corruption risks.
Thanks, Pooja. Generally, a lot of times we are asked that, what are the parameters or what are the things that we should constantly evaluate or ask ourselves or ask about our organization, which will help us assess at what level of anti-corruption compliance we are or we need to be, and what are the type of risks that we face. So I think the list is long, but we have picked up some most relevant questions which you can keep with yourself, and you can feel free to take a screenshot of this slide if you want. But these are some of the questions that you may want to ask yourself, that how will the new amendment of the Prevention of Corruption Act, which is called POCA, impact your organization's ABAC framework? You should go through the amendments. You should understand it. How will it impact your framework? What are the activities that your organization does, which may get covered into this type of a law, and what you need to do to mitigate the risk of running on the wrong line. What are the various ways in which you leverage technology for compliance purposes? This is another question. The next slide is on how to use technology for compliance. So we will give you some ideas, but you can also ask this question. Understand what kind of various technologies are there in the company. One of the most simplistic one is an e-learning platform, which is in LMS. Most commonly, it is called a learning management system. How do you effectively use that to pass on anti-corruption trainings to your employees and to your vendors, etc.? The third question is, what is your perception of compliance standards like ISO 37001? Like Arpinder was saying, many companies in India and many businesses in India are going global, or are inviting global joint venture partners or investors like private equities or funds or large brands like investors globally. Now, any of them, before joining hands with you, would assess the framework, the compliance framework, or the corporate governance levels in your organization. You should assess whether getting a certification like an ISO 37001 certification, will that help? In our opinion, in our experience, it definitely helps. It helps you improve your market perception. It helps you provide more confidence to various stakeholders in the organization, including your board, your shareholders, etc., or to your senior management. But you should reevaluate that. Do you see challenges in having adequate independence, reporting lines, and sources for compliance? As an employee or as a compliance professional in an organization, if you do not have adequate independence or enough resources or budget or enough autonomy, then you will only be able to do until a certain extent, which is on paper. If you really want to do something in practice or bring the real change in the culture of the organization, you will not be able to do that, because somewhere or else you will find a roadblock. So you should constantly ask that question, that as a compliance professional, am I enjoying enough independence? Do I have enough resources? Do I have enough budget in the organization? How have whistleblowing complaints changed in the recent years? The perception and statistics of globally and especially in India is that the whistleblowing complaints are rising. If you see in your organization there are no whistleblowing complaints, or there is no platform for people to blow a whistle, or the level of whistleblowing complaints are still very low, similar to previous years, then you need to evaluate what is going wrong. Why are you not getting enough whistleblowing complaints? Because personally speaking, I have not seen one organization which is 100% clean when there is nothing wrong. And most often than not, no internal audit or statutory audit will bring out issues which a well-functioning whistleblowing hotline can bring out. Because the secrets, the dark secrets of the companies, only its employees know, nobody else. Right? So you should evaluate your compliance, your whistleblowing or your vigil mechanism framework. Even the Companies Act 2018 suggests that now, or requires you to have that now. This question is very important. The next question which I'm talking about is, why do compliance programs typically fail? Ask that question if you have seen that in the past. I will give you a few tips here and a few reasons which we have generally seen. Compliance programs typically fail because of key reasons, like it's only a paper compliance. You have created a framework, but there is nobody to pursue the framework. There is nobody to monitor whether the framework is functioning. Nobody even looks at that. If I look at the financial systems, if I look at a ledger account of, say, marketing expense or sales expenses, or other type of indirect expenses on my P&L, Are they compliant with my anti-bribery framework? And coming to the previous question, if the compliance leader in the organization does not have enough independence or autonomy or resources, the compliance program will fail. So there are many reasons because of which a compliance program can fail. Evaluate that, what is causing to your compliance program not being effective, and try and deal with those challenges or those roadblocks. Next question is, how do you believe compliance programs of Indian organizations rank against that of mature MNCs or global organizations? Like Arpinder said, it's no longer the situation that a compliance framework in India has become optional. It is no longer optional. It is mandatory. It is mandatory. If you're not having a robust compliance framework, we are only waiting for a disaster to happen in the coming future. So compare your compliance program with some mature MNCs, global organizations compliance program, come up with a gap assessment and try to fill those gaps. The last question is, this is valid for most mature organizations who have a very, very robust compliance framework. But what we have seen is, even in those organizations, sometimes there is something called as compliance fatigue that comes in. And this comes in due to lack of clarity on compliance. People start linking non-relevant topics into compliance, or they start creating, smaller things, making them larger than life or larger than the other issues. I'll give you an example. If a government officer walks into your factory for inspection, will you offer him tea? And if he stays longer, will you offer him food? Is a simple question. I have seen organizations discussing this topic for days, right? And then coming up with large, complex systems or processes to have approvals in place, form filling, etc. for that. I think we don't have to think too much on that. If anybody who comes to your factory, even if he's a government officer, it's a normal courtesy to offer him tea, coffee, or lunch if he's staying during the lunchtime. Yeah, but you can't take him to a 5-star hotel near your factory or maybe 20 miles away from your factory for lunch or for dinner. That is not acceptable. But either inside the factory or just adjacent to the factory, if there is a reasonable restaurant or a normal restaurant, it's completely okay to feed him lunch or tea, coffee there. Disclose it well, document it properly, put the right description on the voucher, take approval of the factory head or somebody, and record it in the books. It's not a big issue. So, but a lot of times we see there is a compliance fatigue that sets in, where you are thinking too much about compliance, but on the smaller things. And what happens is, when you start focusing too much on these smaller aspects, you are wasting your resources and time on that, and you're not able to focus on the larger issues which may be hitting your organization very soon. Coming next, let's now look at, this is the last slide, on how you can use technology as a disruptor in compliance world. There are many ways in which you can do that. Pooja mentioned about 6-7 parameters or things which you need to do, right? Including monitoring, third-party compliance, policies, framework, training, etc. In most of those aspects, you can use some form of technology. For example, forensic data analytics. Forensic data analytics is a very, very robust and mature tool or technology which can help you monitor your financial transactions, which can help you monitor your chats, your emails, etc., and throw red flags that this particular transaction may be a problem from a compliance perspective, going by narrations, going by the person to whom it is paid, going by the mode of payment, the time of payment, amounts of payment, etc., etc. But there are many scenarios which are built into these tools, and they can give you enough red flags from a monitoring perspective. The next is visualization tools. There are many visualization tools and dashboards which are available for the top management. These dashboards and visualization tools will at any given point in time tell you where do you stand. If you have targeted to do 10 trainings in a year, how many have you achieved? How many are pending? What is the timeline for the next? If you have targeted to do 4 audits during the year in these different BUs, how many you did, what were the outcomes of it, how are you remediating it. Similarly, other parameters which you built into the tool, it keeps updating automatically, and there is a ready dashboard for top management or for your important stakeholders to always look at, provide feedback, give inputs, so that there is a constructive way in which you can improve your program. There are mobile technologies for training, which we already spoke about. So make training so easy and interactive and interesting that people don't run away from it. Make it very convenient. Allow your employees to take trainings from their mobile phones, sitting at home or while traveling. At least they are learning. It is not necessary that they are sitting in a classroom, they have to waste the whole day going through the training, or they have to travel to cities to attend a training program. If we make it that difficult, obviously our target to achieve the audience or the level of attention reduces. So make it more convenient, more interactive. It can be made using videos, using case studies, etc. So use good training technologies to communicate well with your people, with your employees and third parties. Get due diligences done on your third parties. You don't have to sit yourself and do due diligences. There are very well automated solutions available in the market, where if you just give them the name of the party that you want to do a due diligence or a background check on, you get report within 24 hours with all the basic checks in terms of the world check, the negative database check, the WikiLeaks check, the litigation database checks, all of that. Risk assessments, you can use very good survey platforms or questionnaires for doing your risk assessment and risk profiling amongst your employees. So there is very good technologies available there. And monitoring, I think we already spoke about in the first forensic data analytics, but there are other monitoring tools and techniques also available. So I think that's it from our side. Thank you very much for all of you to be attentive and attend this session. I think Patrick messaged that he had to leave for another meeting. What I was trying to do while Pooja and Arpinder and others were talking is read through some of the questions that were in the chat box, and I've responded through a direct message to the person who has asked the question. But if anybody's question is unanswered, maybe because I was talking, please raise it now, and or post new questions in the chat box, and we will try and respond either on the chat box or while talking. We'll wait for a couple of minutes to see if there are questions coming in. There is a question from Dinesh, and it's a very, very practical question that, obviously there is a lot of corruption, and the larger the company, the larger corruption levels you can observe in those companies. Is there a practical way of dealing with the situation? Like I said in the initial slide of the chessboard, if the king and the queen is corrupt, and if it is driven from that level, no company can put in a compliance framework to become anti-corrupt. Any kind of a compliance framework these kind of companies will set in will only be on the paper and will never work practically, because if the king and the queen is passing a direct message, setting the tone, then obviously there is no way in which you can become compliant, practically compliant. It can always be on the paper. The second question in the same chat is protection of the compliance officer or the lawyer or the finance manager. I think the protection is in our hands. The compliance manager should keep doing everything that is expected of him. In these kind of companies, the autonomy or the authority or the job description of the compliance manager itself is very, very limited. If you are a compliance officer or a compliance professional in true sense, I would never work for companies where I don't get autonomy to work as a real compliance officer. And I think protection is only, simplistically talking, the protection is basically if you are doing your job as per what is described in your job description, there is no protection you require. I mean, just keep doing what you do. But if you are just following the instructions of your superiors and passing wrong entries or approving wrong transactions, then the protection is difficult. You can become a whistleblower, do the complaint, and see how it is handled.
We have a question from Hariharan as well. That is there a lighter touch program for MSMEs?
So like Hariharan, we said, risk assessment is very important. It's like your medical test. Unless you do a complete body checkup, you don't know where is the problem and how do you tackle with the problem. Similarly, small or big organization, everybody needs to do a risk assessment and identify how big a problem or how big a risk you are running. And accordingly, you set in smaller or more easier or more practical programs. And in larger organizations, you need to definitely have a more complex and more robust program. So even for MSMEs, the steps are the same. The 6 buckets are all the same, but you have to implement them in a more simplistic manner. Anaga is asking, a lot of frauds, online shopping, credit card, etc. are taking place by fake sites and phone calls to share PIN, OTP, etc. Even police, cyber cells are not able to catch fraudsters. What is your comment on this? So I think everybody is trying to avoid these frauds. I don't know if I will put this question strictly under anti-bribery, anti-corruption. It is definitely fraudulent activity, but it doesn't really fall under anti-bribery, anti-corruption. But obviously we deal with these cases day in and day out. There are very many ways in which everybody is trying to tackle with this situation. The companies, the fintech companies or the banks are putting in a lot of controls like the OTPs or the PINs, like you said. They are tracking IPs of the phone. So if there is a different laptop or a different phone through which the transaction is happening or a different phone number through which the transaction is being requested, immediately there is a call which goes, automated call which goes to the account holder or the main guy asking if he has initiated the transaction, or there is an OTP, or there is a freeze on the account. So different companies or different organizations are putting in different levels of controls to tackle these kind of frauds. And also there is a lot of focus on training and raising awareness of people or the users or the account holders or credit card holders to not share their details on social media platforms or WhatsApp chats, or you don't even share your OTP, etc. If you get a call, don't respond to phishing emails, etc., etc. There is a lot of education or communication that organizations like banks and credit card issuers are doing to educate people on that. But it's a constant battle. Like you see, the more robust frameworks or the more robust technology you create, the cyber attackers will try and find a way to still beat it. So I think it's a constant effort from our side and from the bank's side to be very, very vigilant and avoid getting caught into these kind of frauds. What is the system to be adopted in banks to ensure impartial loan processing from the viewpoint of using forensic audit or accounting? I think there is a lot that has happened in the last few years in the banking environment after the insolvency and bankruptcy code has come in, where, in some of the investigations, even the bankers have been caught, or their names are coming in, that there was inadequate procedure or inadequate due diligence performed at the bank's level before issuing the loan or before restructuring the loan. So many banks, practically speaking, as on today, because we're working with many of them, are constantly improving their infrastructure and their internal policies and functions to ensure that the loan sanction process is quite robust, that there is a proper importance being given to the credit cell of the organization. there is a proper importance being given to performing right level of background checks, site visits, factory inspections, stock reports, etc. being done on time to ensure that this issue does not come up. But it's an ever evolving process again. While giving the loan, you will never be able to certainly say whether the person is going to really repay or run away. Information technology companies keeping a remote access of the user ID. Frankly speaking, I have no idea about this. I don't think any information technology company or a telecom company or a bank would keep a separate access to your user ID. I mean, the bank can't log into my bank account and do transactions without my permission or without the proper password. I mean, that's my knowledge. I don't think so. And if something like this happens, and if there is a fraud that has happened through that secret access which the company has kept, it will get revealed during the investigation. So, and obviously in those cases, only a set of people would have authority to use that secret access or user ID. So accordingly, the action should be taken. Like Patrick said, India is still not signed up the OECD, but India signed the UN Convention many years back. And post that itself, India has constantly thrived to improve its legal framework and give more autonomy to the investigation agencies. So that is one step that India has taken towards the anti-corruption side, but they have not signed up the OECD. From the blockchain and big data, these are the names of certain technologies. The same can be used on the anti-corruption efforts as well as in your normal business operations. Blockchain would ensure complete transparency of the transaction end to end. So definitely it improves a lot of chances in catching something that is going wrong in the right time. So, but it has been introduced in India is the question. Yes, it has been introduced. A lot of large organizations have implemented great blockchain related technologies in their businesses, which are used for multiple purposes, for smoother functioning of operations as well as for auditing or for monitoring efforts. We would definitely get back to you if there is any additional session scheduled, and thanks for the input on insightful session. Appreciate all of your time and effort to join the session, being attentive, asking so many questions. I'm very, very thankful to all of you for that. Pooja, any last comments or anything from CLA?
No, I think just thank you to everyone for your time. It was great to see so many questions as well. If there are any queries where you'd like to get in touch, our contact details are captured here. But thank you everybody for your time.
Thanks. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.